following program is brought to you in conjunction with the folks at Grace to All with Paul Gray. Now we bring to you the Agape Guy Show with your host, Lenny Manning.
I'm banking everything on love. I'm banking everything on love.
We now present to you the host of the show, a man with experience in teaching, preaching, and music ministry in several different types of church groups. He also has experience in alternative church groups such as house church and organic church. Here is author, speaker, and host of the show, Lenny Manning.
Hello and welcome to the Agape Guy Show. I'm your host, Lenny Manning. I don't know about all those accolades. I think they're true. But let's move on with the show. This is part 3 of the Season 2 premiere, where I'm talking about what led me to learn about God's love. So if anyone is new to this show, I want them to understand what I'm like and how I got to this point in my life. I'm calling this segment The Big Question. So let me ask you a question. Have you ever had a major life-altering encounter with God's love? I had that type of encounter back in 2004. I've noticed that if you ask typical Christians if they know about God's love and what it's all about, they usually say yes. Yet, if you ask them what they think God's love is about, they'll usually give an answer somewhat like this. God loves us so much that He gives us a chance to say a so-called sinner's prayer so we don't go to hell. If you try to talk a bit more in depth about it, either they get a blank look on their face or they start to argue. They'll argue that God's love must be balanced by His anger, wrath, and justice. Well, I remember hearing Wayne Jacobson tell a story about the time he gave a guy a copy of his book, He Loves Me. That book, of course, is about God's love, and Wayne told the guy that. Wayne didn't get a chance to interact with that guy again until a few years later. When he met the guy again, here's what the guy told Wayne. The guy told Wayne that he thought he already knew what God's love was all about. He thought it was about God being loving enough to give us a chance to say the so-called sinner's prayer. So since he thought he knew about that already, he merely put the book on a shelf and let it sit there. Then a year or two later, when he was bored, he got the book and started reading it. As he read the book, he realized that he didn't know really all that much about God's love. He realized it was a bit different than saying the sinner's prayer. He realized that he had assumed a lot and assumed he knew about God's love when he really didn't know much about it at all. He read through the book, and as he started to grasp the information, it started to dramatically change his life. He said that once it made a big change in his life, he wanted to come back and thank Wayne for writing the book. He told Wayne the whole story, and of course Wayne was glad to hear the guy's story. Well, I've noticed similar things. I've seen people who claim that they know about God's love, and they might have even read a book about it. Yet sometimes the information doesn't quite get through to them. Well, I've noticed similar things as well. I've seen people who claim that they know about God's love, and they might have even read a book about it. Yet sometimes the information doesn't quite get through to them. It takes a work of the Holy Spirit to help them realize what God's love is really all about. So if someone tells me they know about God's love, I try to talk to them about it a bit more. I try to ask them about it to see what they mean when they say they know about God's love. I also try to see if the fruit of the Spirit is abundant in their life as well. So if folks toss around some buzzwords and phrases about God's love, I think we should ask them what they think they know. They might have only made assumptions about it, or maybe they're only referring to the sinner's prayer. Reading a book might not be enough for some people either, especially if they aren't ready to hear the main message. If they get hostile to your questions about God's love, then let them go their way for a while. Eventually, they'll get tired of their failures from trying to live by self-effort. If you see them get tired of their fruitless self-efforts, you might try to talk to them again. You might get the opportunity to offer them some solutions to the never-ending treadmill of self-effort. That type of life just wears people out and leaves people with little or nothing to show for it. Sometimes people will see through that nonsense and will start to hunger for something more. That's the time to start showing them God's love and how to avoid the treadmill of self-effort. I tried that for years, and I was quite good at running on that treadmill and making it look like I was prospering. Our egotistical mindset is difficult to change unless we surrender it to God and His love. So we just can't seem to figure out how to play God's way. The reason is that God's way is based on His love, and without that, we can't do things His way. How do we overcome that type of a problem? Well, we need to learn about His ways and do things His way. We need to learn about His love and goodness and surrender ourselves to it. During the learning process of learning about God's love, I'd say that one thing upholds you through life's difficulties. If you remember that verse, love covers a multitude of sins, that's from 1 Peter 4:8, and it's a reference to Proverbs 10:12, where it says, hatred stirs up quarrels, but love makes up for all offenses. That's from the New Living Translation. Well, since sin is basically missing the mark of knowing God's nature is love, let's look at it from that perspective. You see, if love takes care of those things, then if you have some minor mistakes in life, love will cover it. You see, people will notice the love and the goodness flowing out of your life, so it's easy to overlook those type of minor foibles in life. That's how love covers or makes up for those offenses. That'll uphold you in life, so you don't need to get stressed about the small problems in life. For those of you folks who know about God's love, keep moving on in maturity to get to know it more and more. If you aren't sure what I'm talking about, or you don't see how God's love changed my life, here's some help. First of all, you might want to look at the previous 2 episodes from Season 2 of the show. You might also want to go through some books to help you understand the in-depth aspects of God's love. I'd recommend the books I'm about to list. 1. He Loves Me by Wayne Jacobson. You can get a legitimate free download of that book from his website, which is lifestream.org. Just look for the button for free stuff and the drop-down menu items that say Free Books. 2. Classic Christianity by Bob George. You might especially want to look at chapter 11 where he talks about God's love. We might have some differences of opinion on other things, but his writings about God's love was really good. And number 3, Pluriform Love by Thomas J. Ord. He shows a totally different way of looking at theology through the lens of God's love. Number 4, Grace Walk by Steve McVey, and his other book, Beyond an Angry God. Those are 2 very good books as well. I hope that you could at least go through at least one of those books, then try to figure out how to apply God's love to your life. The book, He Loves Me by Wayne Jacobson, has questions you can think about at the end of each chapter. Those questions are there to help you evaluate your life and find ways to apply God's love to your own life. Now, when I say God's love dramatically changed my life, I can honestly tell you it really did. People that know me told me it changed my demeanor and my behavior so much that it seemed like I was a totally different person. Even today, when I tell people how I used to act, they tell me that they can barely believe it because I'm so different these days. I'm not 100% perfect, but I am different than I used to be, a lot different. Let me give you an example of how I used to behave. If I sat in with a Bible study group's teaching, at the discussion time, I almost always made some snarky remarks. I would say things like, "Well, that was a pretty good lesson, but truly good theology would say such and such and so and so." Then I'd give a long list of theological statements and doctrines, and I'd use a lot of really big words that most people didn't even know. Then I'd list theologians and several of their books that backed up what I said, and I'd give a few more things that theologians said on the matter. I thought I was imparting a few words of wisdom, but some friends told me that it didn't seem like it was coming across as words of wisdom. It seemed like I was arrogantly just talking down to people. Well, I felt a bit humbled when some friends told me I was talking down to people. They told me about God's love, and I started to realize that I didn't know much about God's love. Then, once I surrendered myself in total abandonment to God's love, I didn't act that way anymore. God quickly guided me away from that type of behavior. So, these days, although I might cite some books about God's love, I try to avoid talking down to people about theology. I try not to name theologians, list a bunch of theology books, or talk about lofty ideas with big fancy words that most people don't even understand the definitions for them. Besides, if no one understands the words I say and the ideas I'm trying to talk about, then I haven't really helped anybody. So all those big fancy words only seem to distract people away from God's love. So God's love never gets the chance to change them from within. So all those books, creeds, big words, and lofty ideas only seemed like head knowledge, or they were just an intellectual exercise. They don't seem to help people have better relations and interactions, or help people show the fruit of the Spirit. Now, some folks might remind me that we shouldn't check our brains in at the door, but keep thinking critically. I'd say that yes, that's true. I try not to check my brains in at the door either. I try to think for myself and make sure people's teachings have reasonable evidence to back it up. Yet, I try to keep my focus on God's love and see things through the lens of God's love. Whether it's how I view some Bible verses, how I view other people, or how I view situations in life. Now, I'm not perfect at all of it, but I'm light years ahead of where I used to be. I'm no longer the arrogant, smart aleck know-it-all that I used to be. I compare it to trading in an old rundown car for a spaceship that flies faster than the speed of light. That's quite a leap forward in technology and speed, and that's what I feel like sometimes with my behavior. It's a lot different than the old me that I used to be and the old behaviors that I used to show. So if any of you ever see me being humble or showing kindness in any way, it's a miracle from God. It really is. That isn't how I used to act, though. As I mentioned, I was a bit rough until I learned about God's love and surrendered to it in total abandonment. I might not be perfect at showing God's love all the time, but since I follow God's love, it's like the verse that says, love is the higher law. You might also say that it's the greatest law. You can see some of this in Romans 13, verses 8 through 10, where it says, "Owe no man anything except to love each other, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law." You could also see this in Matthew 22, verses 37 through 40, where Jesus said, love is the greatest law. Galatians 5:14 says this, "For the whole law can be summed up in this one command, love your neighbor as yourself." You could also remember that 1 Corinthians 13 says, or it shows that if you have all prophecy and knowledge, but don't show love, you're only making an annoying noise. You could also see the situation as it was from the perspective of the old religious law. If you love someone so much that you never wanted to do them wrong, You already fulfilled the law. Now, some of you might have already encountered God's love in a way that changed your life. You folks might even find my words more of an encouragement than instruction. And that's great. I really love it. Some other folks might not yet have encountered God's love like this, and you're wondering about it. I'd recommend you read those books that I listed, especially He Loves Me by Wayne Jacobson. Those books will likely get you moving down the road toward learning about God's love and applying it to your life. From what I've seen, if you reassess your views or deconstruct without learning about God's love, it doesn't really help all that much. At least it doesn't help to all that much, in my opinion. I've seen people do that and refuse to believe in God's love, and they remain excessively legalistic, excessively judgmental, and excessively condemning. They also show excessively harsh attitudes towards most people, and it's obvious to most of the people around them too. I've lost some things on my journey toward knowing God's love more and more. I've lost things like friendships and relationships due to people refusing to believe in God's love. There are people I can barely even talk to anymore. I've got to watch what I say, or they might get angry and start unnecessarily calling me a heretic or some other thing like that. There's lots of old friends that still attend church groups that teach harsh stuff like that God's angry with them. So I can't talk to some people about this stuff. Most churches don't want someone like me in their church to stir things up by talking about God's love. My apologetic defense of God's love was born out of years of abuse from people refusing to believe in God's love. I eventually typed out an essay about it. I even showed how Christian college professors teach that love is God's nature. I think I've talked about that in season 1 of the show in episode 13, and you can find that on my YouTube channel. It's titled Understanding the Duns, Part 5, Reassessing God's Love. There were also some other things I lost, and it seemed like it was a good thing that I lost them. Such as when abusive people walked away from me, I didn't get abused anymore. The continual abuse from some people led me to read the Boundaries book and learn about good, healthy boundaries. That helped me deal with the abusive people a bit more. Some other things I lost were fear, stress, anxiety, and a life of being overworked by trying to live by self-effort. Leaving these things behind helped me stop living a life of drudgery and the unstoppable treadmill that wore me out, not to mention the constant fear that I didn't do enough to appease God's anger that had wreaked havoc on my health. And I mean both mental and physical health. My mental and physical health suffered from the chronic stress of it all. Let me explain a little bit more about what I mean when I say I left behind fear and stress. I stopped fearing that my behavioral problems made God angry with me. In the past, I was constantly afraid God would get angry with me due to my bad behavior. I mean, I thought God would do bad things to me, like allow a person to wreck their car into mine while I was driving. I was also afraid that God might allow a robber to shoot me if I made him angry enough or made God angry enough. That type of constant fear and paranoia leaves you nearly debilitated and where you're afraid to do anything in life. It also leaves you with a gigantic amount of stress and anxiety because you're always thinking that something bad is going to happen to you. I also left behind a lot of stress from trying to do all the religious types of activities I thought I was supposed to do. I was taught that a Christian had to do many different types of activities in order to please God so God wouldn't be angry. I was constantly trying to make sure I had everything checked off from the list of things I had to do. I was constantly trying to make sure I didn't forget anything either. I thought that forgetting to do some religious activities could make me miss some blessings. I might also make God angry at me, and then God might make bad things happen to me. So I was always stressed about these things. I also taught people that they needed to live by my to-do list to keep them from getting punished by God, and so they wouldn't make God angry. I didn't want God mad at them, because if they secretly did something to make God angry, then God might punish them while I'm standing near them, so some of their punishment might overflow onto me. I didn't want God to punish them with a car wreck if I was in the car with them or in the car right next to them. Have you ever been bothered by fear and stress like that? It's almost debilitating. What if I told you that there's a remedy for fear and stress like these that I spoke about? That brings me to the question I asked at the beginning of the show. Have you ever had a major life-altering encounter with God's love? If you haven't, I'd like to ask if you would like to learn about God's love to see if it can help you. I can tell you that learning about the in-depth details of God's love sure did take care of those problems for me. I've been thinking about it a lot lately, and about how I don't have that type of fear and stress anymore. First, I'll show you what God's love is like, so you can get a taste of what it's like. As I learned about the Bible verse 1 John 4:8 and 16, and how it shows the phrase, God is love, the way the words are used in the original language shows that love is God's nature. I also learned the same thing in my theology class I took at a conservative college-level Bible school. So, since God is love and that's his nature, we could go to the famous love chapter in the Bible to see what God's love is like. That famous chapter is 1 Corinthians 13, especially verses 4 and 5. So, since God is love, in order to see what God's love is like, we could exchange the phrase love is for God is. That's a good way to have an application to help see what God's love is like. We might even put in some personal pronouns to make it personal to us personally. It might read something like this: God is patient to you. God is kind to you. God doesn't act envious, boastful, or proud to you. God doesn't dishonor you. God doesn't act self-seeking. I guess that means he seeks your best interest too. God isn't provoked to anger against you. And how about this last phrase? God keeps no record of your wrongs, or doesn't keep grudges against you. Some people might try to argue against that and say that God's love needs to be balanced by his anger, wrath, and justice. Yet that isn't quite the truth. My friends who taught me about God's love showed me something very interesting. They showed me that the Bible never clearly states that God's love needs to be balanced by anything. Remember how my theology professor taught about God's nature? Or that love is God's nature? Well, the teacher never taught that God's anger, wrath, or justice was God's nature. So since they weren't God's nature, they couldn't possibly counterbalance God's love, since love was his nature. Some people might come back and say that holiness is God's nature. And yes, that's true. But let's look further at it to get some better information here. You see, God's holiness doesn't negate God's love. Holiness and love are meshed together. So part of holiness means that God is also ethereal or spirit and doesn't have a body like we would. The other part of holiness means that God is sinless, but our behavior doesn't cause God to hate us or get angry with us due to our foibles in life. It seems like God still loves us and always has loved us. You see, God is also immutable, which means his nature doesn't change. So God is love, and he loves us and can't stop loving us. So as the verse in Romans 8 shows, nothing can separate us from God's love. It's impossible. So that's why my prayer is like that of the Apostle Paul in Ephesians 3 verses 14 through 19, where he asked God to help people to know his love. Then, as they know God's love, they are filled with the fullness of God. That is what makes you come alive and flourish from the power that comes from within. If this is something you would like in your life, take a look at those books I mentioned, like the book He Loves Me by Wayne Jacobson. I can also tell you that as I tried to live a life of rejecting the idea that God is loving when I was younger, it wasn't a fulfilling life. Rejecting God's love wasn't helpful in my life at all. It didn't help my behavioral issues, and it didn't help me show the fruit of the Spirit in my life. Yet, when I learned about God's love and surrendered to it in full abandonment, it sure did improve my life. Wow, did it? It sure did. This reminds me of a line from a Christian song that came out about 30 years ago. The line of the song went something like this: "In the light of love, other gifts they may flower or blossom. Oh, but love is the only power." I think that was by Out of the Grave from their 1993 song, "Love is the Only Power." If you want to learn more about how I learned about God's love, you can read the book about my life. It's titled Journal to a Journey: My Life is More Than Wishes and Dreams. It's on Amazon's website, and if you put in the whole title, you can find it. I'll put a QR code on the screen that you can scan to find it on Amazon.com. If you purchase, it'll help it support this show so I can help keep making more episodes of this show. Well, it looks like my time's about up. So remember what that song said: love is the only power. So I think we should all get to know that type of agape love and what it's like. Yet, as for now, I'll just say that I hope to see you in the next episode of The Agape Guy Show. Goodbye for now.
I'm banking everything on love. I'm banking everything on love. I see the flags unfurl and they're blowing the other way. I see the anchor rising and the ship moving